Okay, hey everyone. I hope you're okay with just a voiceover video today. Like I said in my last video, I know not many people watched it, but I've been really struggling to get on camera recently. I'm just at a point where I'm trying to make sure that I'm making any content as opposed to no content, because, bills still have to be paid, and there are still things I want to talk about, even if I'm just struggling with, getting in the right headspace to be on camera and do all the regular filming stuff. So today I want to talk about a really, really infuriating topic, and it's a difficult one, and it's about misogyny, as things usually are. So I think a lot of you know that I use Reddit, I browse Reddit, I read Reddit. A lot of you may have seen me posting photos of Kyra on Reddit. And as well as following subreddits I really like and learn things from, or that are just entertaining, I do, to be honest, follow a lot of really horrible subreddits as well, because sometimes I feel like I can make content from it, sometimes I just want to see how the other side thinks. Sometimes I want to kind of argue back a little bit and fact check people who are spreading misinformation, and this is one of those times. This is a really horrible subreddit. It's one where men will basically make any excuses for using violence against women or insulting women. They try and just paint all women bad, ha ha ha, you can't get away with stuff by being a woman anymore, let's be violent towards you, and so on. It's not a very nice subreddit, but it's one that I follow for, research and videos and all that sort of thing. And I came across this post titled, "Up to 90% of women in lesbian relationships experience domestic abuse from their female partners." And it's really funny because they open this post by saying partner violence in lesbian and gay relationships has recently been identified as an important social problem. Partner or DV amongst lesbians has been defined as including physical, sexual, and psychological abuse, although researchers have most studied physical violence. It's really funny because they say recent, blah blah blah. No, they provide a source list where every single source is between 25 and 30 years old. These numbers could not be more out of date. They have cherry-picked very old, out-of-date sources so they can provide misleading information and misleading conclusions. They go on to say that about 17 to 45% of lesbians reported having been the victim of at least one act of physical violence perpetrated by a lesbian partner. These acts of physical violence, in their words, include things like disrupting others' sleeping or eating habits, pushing or shoving, driving recklessly to punish, slapping, kicking, hitting, biting. SA by one partner has been reported by up to 50% of lesbians. Psychological abuse has been reported as occurring at least one time by 24 to 90% of lesbians. A big range there. 24 to 90%. And therefore they're like, haha, see? 90%. We'll run with that. They then go on to say things like, there are several similarities between lesbian and heterosexual partner violence. Violence appears to be about as common among lesbian couples as among heterosexual couples. In addition, the cycle of violence occurs in both types of relationships. However, there are also several differences. In lesbian relationships, the butch, physically stronger or more masculine or wage-earning member of the couple may be as likely to be the victim as the batterer. It's so much loaded language in this. It's not great. Like I say, and then he posts to a subreddit called "Women Are Violent Too," which I haven't actually looked at because I am not in the right state of mind to do that right now. I just saw this, and basically all the men are like, "Ha, see, look, all you need to know is hetero marriages have a 50% chance of divorce. Gay marriages with a man, 25% chance. Lesbian marriages, 75% chance. Take from this what you will." And all the men are like, this makes sense. Men usually get along great with each other. It's just like being with your best mate. And it's like, look, if you just want to be with a man, be with a man, okay? You don't need to dance around it like this. Just admit you hate women and you want to be with a man and move on. But it's absolutely ridiculous. A few people did try and point out that, some of the stats are wrong. The whole up to 90% is iffy wording. And then they're like, did you even bother to read the meta study? A bunch of people used it as an excuse to be really homophobic, with comments like, it's because homosexuality is bred out of trauma in early childhood. This means people who have difficulty with emotional regulation, especially when it comes to interpersonal relationships. Women also feel like they have a license to hit, as they rarely face any consequences, as they rarely do significant damage to men. Put two of these people together and you get the results in the opening post. They should have chosen the bear, LMAO. Like, there's just so much wrong with these replies and everything like this. And one person pointed out that the studies are old, and I chimed in. I'm like, well, 1995, which is when most of these studies are from, is 30 years ago. And then this other person chimes in, it's like, do you think behaviour has improved or declined in the last 30 years? And this is where I start to kind of chime in a little bit. And I'm going to just read you my replies, because it points out a lot of the flaws in both using old data, how they've misinterpreted some of that data, and how I see patterns and behaviours have changed. And then after I've read you my replies here, I'm also going to give you a few of the up-to-date stats, because the Office for National Statistics has just released the 2024 statistics for domestic violence. And I think they're worth talking about because they are up-to-date and they do tell us a hell of a lot. So if you don't mind me just reading my own words back to you. So in response to the, do you think behaviour has improved or declined in the last 30 years? I said, oh, well, that's a huge question and complicated to answer, but I'll give it a go. And then I prefaced by saying that, like, I'm definitely here reading this subreddit for a very different reason to a lot of users, so bear that in mind. And secondly, I don't have sources at my fingertips for this, but what I do know comes from making a hell of a lot of fully sourced YouTube videos over the years, writing essays, doing a lot of fundraising for DV charities, and sadly being a survivor myself. This didn't go down well. They did not like this, but, you know, today, as of filming, I do have stats and sources, and they're all linked in the video description. So I said, firstly, I think what we all need to remember is that the rates of reported DV are always lower than what's actually happening. There's always stigma around being a victim regardless of your gender. Conviction rates are so low that reporting to the police is just likely to put you in more danger rather than anything else. A lot of people have children they're misguidedly trying to protect by staying with the abuser, and abusers can make it impossible for a victim to leave by isolating their victim or controlling them physically or economically, so they literally do not have the means to leave. Another reason a lot of the work DV charities do is so important, by the way, because they provide these people resources and safe shelters. Just going to jump in here. The 2024 Office for National Statistics stats on domestic violence show that there are over, this is just in the UK, by the way, there are over 2 million estimated victims of domestic violence in the UK, but only roughly 1.4 of those incidents and victims were reported. So that's a huge discrepancy. And from then, even the ones that were reported, barely any of the abusers were charged, barely any were convicted. So it's really important to remember that when we talk about, like, how many people are victims, how many people are abusers, we can't just look at, oh, well, these are the conviction rates because they're so damn low. We can't even look at police reporting rates because, again, so damn low. I know, just speaking from experience, and I've spoken about this in other videos before, but when I was in this situation and I had to report him to the police because my abuser, when I left him, was threatening to kill me, and it was absolutely terrifying. I didn't push to press charges because I was so scared of him. I just wanted him away from me, and I wanted the police to give him a warning and hopefully get him to stay away from me. That's all I wanted. It was so hard having to give my statement and relive the months of abuse I'd faced, go through the story again and again and again, going back and grabbing screenshots of, like, all the threatening messages he'd sent me and the times that he was, like, calling me names and stuff. It was horrible having to talk about the ways in which he hurt me, and it was really, really difficult, and I didn't want to have to go through that again and again and again by making even more statements. And then if it got to court, you have to go through all that, and then you're going to, like, have your story challenged by their defense solicitor, and it's just re-victimizing all over again. It's really, really hard. So I completely understand why so few people don't report to the police, because it's really hard. Anyway, back to what I wrote, and I said, Secondly, what you need to remember is that the most dangerous times, the times when you're most likely to be killed by an abusive partner, are 1, when you're trying to leave them, and 2, when you're pregnant. These factors will also factor into the number of people reporting DV, either to the police, friends, or in studies, because a person generally doesn't report DV if they haven't left their partner because they're too scared of dying, which again is one of the reasons so many of the numbers are underreported. All this to say, stats today show that men are still overwhelmingly the main perpetrators of domestic violence, and women are overwhelmingly the victims. However, this doesn't mean we can ignore male victims. They matter and should be taken seriously. So the stats on who the perpetrators are, this comes from a Women's Aid domestic abuse report, again the 2024 one, so as recent as we can get. As a summary of this report, they tell us that on-track national data relating to female service users shows that the overwhelming majority of the alleged perpetrators are male. 94.4% of perpetrators were male in these studies. One study of 96 cases of domestic abuse recorded by the police found that men are significantly more likely to be repeat perpetrators and significantly more likely than women to use physical violence, threats, and harassment. In a 6-year tracking period, the majority of male recorded perpetrators, 83% of them, had at least 2 incidents of recorded abuse, with many having a lot more than 2, and one man having 52 repeat incidents. Whereas in the cases where women were recorded as the perpetrator, the majority, 62%, had only 1 incident of abuse recorded, and the highest number of repeat incidents for any female perpetrator was 8. The study also found that men's violence tended to create a context of fear and control, which was not the case when women were perpetrators. And this is reported by Women's Aid, but it's from a study done in 2013 completely independently. Because you might say, okay, well, if it's coming from Women's Aid, then of course they're going to have more female victims, and therefore you're likely going to have more male perpetrators, right? Because male victims with female perpetrators aren't going to Women's Aid, which is absolutely fair. And that's why they're like 94.4% of perpetrators were male stat might be overstating it, absolutely. But the fact they're then using independent studies as well, which say, 83%, like, it's lower, obviously, but not that much. Okay, I then went on to say there are again factors to take into account when reporting levels of DV and abuse these days. 1, there's less stigma today than 30 years ago for most, but not all victims, and thankfully DV is no longer seen as normal, so more people are reporting than they used to, right? So this is in regards to why we can't just look at the stats from 30 years ago, and why we need up-to-date stats to talk about this today, because this is, how things have changed, why numbers of reports are likely to change, and that sort of thing. I said 2, women in relationships with men are more likely to report than they used to and have the most campaigns and charity support directed their way. But, and sorry, there's a typo here, numbers are also very likely underreported by a lot because women in relationships with men are the people most likely to be killed by their partners, especially when trying to leave them, especially when pregnant. More women will also stay with an abusive partner if they already have kids, so this means reported numbers will be much lower than they actually are. And if you'd like the stats on people killed by their partners and family members in DV incidents, I can give you this from... So this is combined data for the year ending March 2021, the year ending March 2023 in England and Wales. These are homicides related to DV. And you know what? Some women did commit homicides. So 7 women killed another woman, 39 women killed a man. Out of those 7 women who killed other women, none of them were partners or ex-partners. They were all other family members. So it was likely, a sister, a mother, a daughter, an aunt, that sort of thing, not someone in a lesbian relationship. No lesbians killed their partners in those 2 years in the UK, well, in England and Wales. However, 224 men killed women, including 173 who they were partners or ex-partners. And men killed men. Oh, bless you, Kyra. And men killed men too. 83 men killed other men. So, including, and these were mostly other family members, but it did include 7 partners or ex-partners. So that means you are statistically most likely to die if your partner is male, regardless of what gender you are. Yeah? Statistically, women in lesbian relationships are least likely to be killed by their partners. Yeah? Back to what I said, and point 3 was men in relationships with women are more likely to face psychological abuse or emotional abuse, but not as often physical or sexual abuse. Not saying it doesn't happen though. So for this reason, more men feel safer leaving their abusive partners. However, these men may still feel stigma around speaking out about this because the whole culture of toxic masculinity has lied to men, saying they're weak if they're victims. They're not weak at all, and being a survivor and leaving your abuser is one of the bravest and strongest things a person can do, of course, right? Often men in heterosexual relationships also don't have a strong and emotional support network of friends who they can turn to for genuine emotional support, and so are less likely to tell their friends about the abuse. For these reasons, it's also likely the number of men being abused by women is underreported, but also more likely to be a different kind of abuse than faced by women in hetero relationships. Oh, actually, the other thing I didn't even mention about the homicide stats is that those are people killed by their partners, but we don't know the killers were the abusers. There is a chance that some of those people killed their partners or family members kind of in self-defense. That is a thing that's worth considering and thinking about as well. But yeah, just worth saying. Point 4 I made was that women in relationships with women are the least likely to be killed by their partners, even when they try to leave, as shown by the stats that we got from the last 2 years. Women also tend to have larger emotional support networks, and these women are less likely to be pregnant or have kids at the time. For these reasons, women in relationships with women are likely to have, still underreported, but the closest to accurate levels of domestic violence and abuse reports, because this is the group who feel safest leaving, reporting, and have support. Point 5 was talking about men in relationships with men. The abuse is more likely to be physical and sexual here, although of course emotional abuse happens too. And it can be dangerous for men to leave these kinds of relationships, although statistically not as dangerous as it is for women with abusive male partners. However, all the same issues as above apply. There's more stigma for male victims, especially with male partners. These men may not have the strongest support networks, and now, on top of that, a nice doll for homophobia as well, that anyone reporting might face, and again, sorry, typo there. And it's clear why this is the most underreported group out there. These men may leave their abusers, but never tell anyone about it. Therefore, even if we see, for example, X amount of people in, lesbian relationships are abusive, Y amount of people in straight relationships, we still have to know that those numbers are all skewed in one way or another, and it's important to consider the factors which may be skewing them. I said it's important to look at stats and understand what they tell us, but in this case, I think the more important things to consider are what stops individuals from leaving abusers, speaking out and getting help, and how do we combat this? How do we continue to reduce the stigma for all survivors? How do we teach people to have the emotional intelligence and empathy to not be abusers in the first place, and so on? Of course, a man responded with the very, very helpful, not reading all that. Lovely, great, thank you. Good to know you're really engaging with this topic and you're not just here to crap all over women. The person who asked me about that, though, they responded back and said, so given the circuitous response, I don't think it was circuitous, I think it was detailed, but they said behaviour hasn't changed, but reporting has. If so, how does this make the 90s data irrelevant? And I was like, well, behaviour has changed, and reporting has, and then, anyway. I said, I never said behaviour hadn't changed, just that it's impossible to see patterns, and that I think there are more important issues here than just your see women bad narrative. I also don't think another comment I saw saying all women are trash is helpful, because that was a comment I saw. As I said, men still commit the most acts of domestic violence, and you don't see me here saying all men trash, all men are violent, let's talk about how men bad are, do you? No. The issue isn't that one gender is worse than the others, the issue is that DV and abuse is wrong, and we need to address why people are afraid to leave their abusers and why people abuse in the first place. Understanding the current culture and laws in any place can be a huge part of this. As for behaviour not changing, it absolutely has, but it's once again difficult to quantify, as all the stats and studies show. So the pandemic increased the number of domestic violence incidents dramatically, especially amongst men in relationships with women. As a lot of people began to lose their jobs, more cis men felt emasculated and took it out on their female partners. Again, thanks to toxic masculinity, right? But it happened in all relationships. We saw the biggest rise amongst cis men committing violence against cis women, right? Also, the nature of homosexual relationships has changed dramatically in the last 30 years. They're more openly common now. Couples can get married now, have more gay couples have children. These all factor into the stats. There's a huge chance before that the stats were skewed for gay couples because there weren't as many gay couples out, right? So I kind of fumbled my wording here a little bit, but the point I was trying to make was that basically there was a higher chance that if you had to report domestic violence, then you'd be kind of forced to be out, right? So chances are there are a lot more healthy homosexual relationships out there not being factored into those stats because people weren't out yet. So it might seem to be 24% of lesbians, 90% of lesbians, but it wasn't really, was it? It was 24 or 90% of out lesbians. That doesn't include all the couples that were hiding still, which, there was still a lot more in the 90s than there are today. And I said, what about gay people who weren't out in the 90s or were in compulsive heterosexual relationships, right? This also changes how we interpret those stats versus stats today. And the other thing is, a lot of stats, including the ones in that study, ones done today, one of the things they don't take into account is they just seem to assume that the person doing the violence is the same gender as the person the victim now identifies as being attracted to, if that makes sense. So the other thing to consider is, and I kind of messed up my words a little bit here, I probably wasn't clear enough, but so a lot of these studies, both the ones done today and back then, and Kyra's sniffing the microphone, hi baby, they all kind of assume that if a lesbian woman was abused, then it must have been a woman doing the abusing. But they don't think about the fact that maybe she was in a relationship with a man before. What about bisexual people? Who was the abuser there? Was it a man or a woman? Or what? None of these take into account non-binary people, actually. So, for example, and this is what I wrote, one prominent website uses these stats today, right? Around 44% of lesbians and 61% of bisexual women have experienced forms of rape and physical violence by an intimate partner, as compared to 35% of straight women. 25% of gay men and 37% of bisexual men have experienced forms of rape and physical violence by an intimate partner, compared to 29% of straight men. Interesting, but it's missing a lot of information. So, for example, amongst those 44% of lesbians, some of those would have used to be in heterosexual relationships and may have experienced violence at the hands of those men. It doesn't mean that, and same for the gay men in those stats, it doesn't mean that a man or woman specifically was doing that to them. Because that's never specified. So again, kind of skews our stats a bit. Again, for the bisexuals, doesn't specify who's committing those acts of violence, does it? The other thing to consider is that gay and bisexual people are still the minority, in terms of numbers. So around 3% of people identify as gay, lesbian, or bisexual, according to Google, right? It's bigger amongst other age groups. So apparently it's around 10% of 16 to 24-year-old women in the UK that are lesbian or bisexual. So we have to remember that 44% of that group is different to 44% of straight people, As an example, 44% of a group of 100 lesbians is still a lot fewer people than 35% of a group of, comparatively, 890 straight men, right? So even if you just look at percentages, that can skew the numbers. What we kind of have to be actively looking at is okay, but how many men were violent abusers and how many women were? And it's still overwhelmingly more men by hundreds of thousands of people. Not even just a little amount, by a lot, And again, none of this even touched on the massively important topic that trans people are the ones who actually face the most domestic violence and intimate partner abuse. More than anyone, regardless of if they're a trans man or woman, regardless of the gender of their partner, they're the ones who face the most abuse. It's... they don't think about any of that, do they, Coobs? No, they don't. I know. And again, a very, very nice man responded with, not reading all that either. Hi baby, I know. Sorry. The original poster, he responded to being called out for his old stats by saying, more recent research on intimate partner violence with lesbian relationships circa 2018. And then he posted an article, and again, this quotes, I think it was the same stats that I used, 61.1% of bisexual women, 43.8% of lesbian women, 37.3% of bisexual men and 26% of homosexual men experienced intimate partner violence during their life, while 5% of heterosexual women and 29% of heterosexual men. So that's absolutely not the right stat for heterosexual women. It's just not. Like, I don't know if it was a typo, if he's purposely being misleading or misquoting, but that is an entirely incorrect stat. I also replied to this, and I was like, I think you're mixing up some studies here, or the one you're quoting is. Most recent research shows that within the last year, 5 to 6% of heterosexual women have experienced intimate partner violence, whereas over a lifetime, it's close to 35% of heterosexual women. That 61% of bisexual women is also a lifetime number. If you take how many it's been in the last year, you're probably also close to like 5 or 6%, right? And then I just pointed out the numbers are skewed and blah, blah. Men are still overwhelmingly the perpetrators of intimate partner violence. No reply. Sorry, this little one's demanding belly rubs here, aren't you? I know. You're pointing at me. I know. Good girl. Again, to look at the Office of National Statistics Crime Survey stats, they said that, I know, baby, just general numbers of men and women in general, it was 7% of women, 3% of men who've experienced it in the last year. So again, more women are victims, more men are sadly the perpetrators, more women are reporting to the police as well. That's a big thing. It's just so frustrating. And the reason I want to talk about this is because even when presented with like hard facts in front of them, they don't want to listen. They don't want, like, men like this don't want to listen. They don't want to engage. And I have some amazing men in my audience who are so thoughtful, and they listen, they ask intelligent questions, they're like genuinely doing things to help and learn and be better. And then you just get these like incel-y men online who are like, ooh, all women are bad, ooh, and they're so angry about everything. And when they're faced with like actual stats, they'll either take those stats and just completely misrepresent them and lie about them, or they're like, no, sorry, too much, not reading that, can't be bothered, not gonna listen to a woman. One of the stupidest responses I got was like, basically one of them just pointed out a typo I made, and I was like, oh, my bad, let me fix that. No reply. Another person was just like, oh, don't worry, they're not saying anything anyway. And then another person replied with, do you want to hit him, Rachel? And I was like, no, what an odd question. Like, this is so weird. Another great argument I saw online that none of these people are considering is, and I kind of brought this up slightly with the homicide stats, but let's say we talk about police incidents, like just police incidents that are reported, right? It doesn't like, let's say someone goes to the police and says, I have this bruise from my partner, they hit me here. We don't know that wasn't a defensive wound or something reactionary to other abuse that they faced. And again, that can really skew the stats, and it's so difficult. Like, I don't like the term reactive abuse because I think it's a bit of a misnomer, but it's very true that like when you're subjected to so much abuse from a person, you can end up responding with, saying nasty things back. You can maybe push them out of the way when you're like, I pushed my abuser out of the way when he'd like trapped me in a room and I was trying to get out, and then he was like, see what you've done, you're as bad as me. And I was like at the time I was like, oh god, I'm a terrible person, like this is absolutely awful, I'm the worst person in the world. But logically looking back, I was like, no, I'm sorry, he physically trapped me in a room. What else was I meant to do? I needed to escape. Anyway, so it doesn't take into account incidents like that either. And yeah, I'm finding it very frustrating. It's like people want to be ignorant just so they can be angry and hateful, and it's really frustrating. So that's all I want to talk about today. I just want to do a really short video. It's like 2 a.m. here, and I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit. But this little one's demanding I go to bed now, aren't you, baby? Do you have anything you want to say to the microphone? Oh, good job, baby. Good job. But yeah, please let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Thanks for your patience in dealing with me while I'm struggling with the whole like, getting on camera and sorting my life out thing. But I appreciate you a lot. Thank you so much. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And yeah, I will see you again soon. Thank you so much.